Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session about planets in aspect to the Nodal Axis. The reason I'd like to present this for all of you is the nodes are very powerful, dynamic. They are part of the eclipses, and they're a very prominent evolutionary axis in our chart. So we often don't pay enough attention to the fact that when planets aspect the nodes, they become very dramatic and important in our life journey and by transit as well. So welcome to the new paradigm. And before we get deeply involved into this study, I would like to introduce you to my work, Maurice Fernandez.com. You can check my website. A new one is in process, hopefully ready soon. I'm teaching a course, a diploma course, and I'm also um, the president of the Organization for Professional Astrology, OPA, OPA. So I'm offering several workshops. You can check my website, which is not updated. I'm showing you here in June, on June 2nd and 1st and 2nd, I'm going to teach about astrology for parenting, which is a very delicate thing to do to analyze the chart of children. But I've helped tremendously many parents because understanding the soul journey of younger people can really make a difference. It can really put them on their path sooner than they would. But at the same time, we have to be very careful because children have not yet manifested the full expression of their chart. So we don't want to obstruct a natural development. So I'm sure that, if whether you have children or you're working with people, working with children's chart is very important and valuable. So June 1st and 2nd, check it out. And this is a little bit more about my program. It's a 2-year certification diploma program that basically is about the mastery of chart analysis, from predictive techniques to understanding the soul journey. And this chapter on the nodes is also a very important one in this course. So this really prepares you to master this knowledge and possibly become yourself a professional astrologer. I'm leading this program with OPA, and we have a wonderful workshop coming up on June 9, which is 4 ladies are going to discuss different transit and speak about how to handle patterns of critical tension, including the July eclipses, the Saturn-Pluto on the nodes, Jupiter-Neptune square, and Mars in Cancer on the North Node opposing Pluto, Saturn. And I'm going to talk about this in our workshop today. So check out opaastrology.org, and that's going to take place on June 9. And it's free for OPA members. It's $25 if you're not a member. So as we now get started, understanding the nodal axis, what are the nodes? Let's start with a brief introduction to this big evolutionary theme in our chart. So the nodes are the 2 points of intersection. They're not planets. There's nothing to look at if you point a telescope at that part of the sky. It's simply where the path of the sun, which is also called the ecliptic, and the path of the moon intersect. And there's a 5-degree gap at maximum distance between these 2 paths. So they intercross twice in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, representing the north and south node. And these 2 points happen to be exactly opposite each other in our natal chart. Um, so why is that important? Because first of all, when we refer to the nodal axis in general, it's called the nodal axis of the moon. Now, we just don't say the full definition of it, but it's actually the moon's nodes. And that's why it's referring to the moon crossing the path of the sun. You can have other planets crossing the path of the sun, and they're going to have their own nodes. But because the sun and the moon are so important in our personal development, they represent really in our chart, the control room where everything is centralized and processed. They are extremely important. So these points of intersection, I call them portals. They are portals of energy. And whatever sign your nodes are in, this is where the portal um, is activated in your personal life. That's your personal story. So usually we refer to the south node as the place where we're coming from. All the past life memories, the gifts that we bring into this life, as well as the traumas, the difficulties, the obstacles. And so the South Node represents what is familiar. And you will, if we speak about children and the chart of children, you will see that children will very immediately express their South Node, even earlier than their Sun energy. Whereas the North Node is something you tend to access later in life, and I'm not talking about very late, but in perhaps all along you start to feel the calling of the North Node, and then it becomes more and more familiar. Now we're going to talk about how that can be altered as planets aspect those nodes, but this is the general and generalized definition. Now, when you access your North Node, it's basically a point of balance. It's an important lesson in your life. Your North Node is what you need to learn. But you must always remember that you never lose sight of the South Node. The South Node is not something you must leave behind. It's something you need to bring with you to the North Node. And the purpose is to balance these 2 extremes, this duality. So if currently, the South Node is in Capricorn, North Node is in Cancer, so we're coming from a place of being authority figures and being responsible and taking on a lot of projects. And it's very, Capricorn is very ambitious, and it's the leader of the pack. It's the one who will basically need to be strong, need to be the mature person in the room. Whereas the North Node in Cancer says you need to access your vulnerable side, you need to access this inner child. So you're actually moving from the South Node in Capricorn, from the adult, back to the child, Cancer. And that's extremely important because it's about strengthening your foundations. It's going back to all these emotional needs that you may have repressed or skipped over. So returning to the North Node in Cancer and I say returning because it's like a return to your childhood, is going to be, the calling of your soul journey. And if you're born with this North Node. But as you access the North Node in Cancer and you become more in touch with your emotions, you're not as ambitious as you used to be. You want to slow down your rhythm. You want to, develop a more feminine approach to life, more nurturing, uh, less about pushing, but more about embracing. You should not lose sight of your South Node in Capricorn, because otherwise you're going to drown in your emotions and you're going to become a big baby. If you overindulge your North Node, in this case Cancer, you may basically let the emotions control you and feel very insecure and feel all the time vulnerable and never feel ready. There's a sense of wanting to stay in the cocoon forever. So always balance is the key to success and evolution. So integration of both the Capricorn and the Cancer will be critical. So what happens when planets end up touching those points? And if we speak about the Sun and the Moon, let's speak about the Sun and the Moon on their nodes. So, these are two abstract points in space, and the Sun could be anywhere on that orbit. The Moon could be anywhere on that orbit. But when they actually get to these intersection points, that's when we have eclipses. Now, the first thing that happens to create an eclipse is that you need the Sun to be close to the nodes. And that happens twice a year. The Sun will be on one node, and then 6 months later, it's going to be on the other node. So if now the nodes are in Cancer Capricorn, we're going to have the Sun on the North Node in July, as it's in Cancer, and then it's going to be on the South Node end of December, early January, when it's in Capricorn, because that's where the nodes currently are. And that's going to change as the nodes shift to Sag, Gemini. They go retrograde, so they move from Capricorn to Sag, and Sag to Scorpio, and so forth. So when the Sun gets in proximity to the nodes, we are what we call in eclipse season. So it's not necessarily the day of the eclipse, but it's the general time frame where eclipses are activated. And when the Moon ends up meeting the Sun, whether it's on the same node or it's on the opposite node, we have the actual eclipse day. So when we have both Sun and Moon on the same node, it's a solar eclipse. And when they are on opposite nodes in opposition, it's a lunar eclipse. Full moon, lunar; new moon, solar. And that's very dramatic, because what happens, it means that both the Sun and the Moon are on the same orbit. And that's why we have an eclipse. It happens to be that from our perspective on Earth, the Moon is exactly the same size as the Sun, even though they're not objectively the same size. But because the Moon is 400 times closer than the Sun to us, and the Sun is 400 times larger than the Moon, that exact synchronicity makes it so that visually they have exactly the same size. And so when they meet, when they meet on these 2 points, they overlap each other and they cover each other's sphere. So when it's a full moon, when it's a new moon and a solar eclipse, basically we see the moon between, the sun and us. So the moon is hiding, covering the light of the sun. And when it's a lunar eclipse, the earth is covering the light that's projected on the moon, and so the moon becomes dark. And once again, this is only possible because of this incredible synchronicity between the sizes and the distance of the sun and the moon. So the sun and the moon are really so important to us. And if we speak about the 2 nodes being portals, well, the portal is activated, are activated, because there are 2 of them, when we have an eclipse. That's really when we can see the full effect of the nodes. Now think about what is a portal? What do I mean by that? Any planet that stands on the nodes, in this case the sun and the moon, are going to be guardians of the portal, keepers of the gates. So think about the fact that there's a lot of energy circulating around the Earth. Many planets, asteroids, black holes, you name it. And, we go about our lives. We do what we usually do. We have a routine, we have a job, we have family, we have things to take care of. But when these gates are opened, when these nodal portals are activated, we have an access to other dimensions, to something larger than our ego. And so every planet that's going to be on those nodes is going to basically activate the portal. And if it's the sun and the moon, it has to do with something that, connects our ego, ourselves, to this higher frequency, higher dimension. And we are basically accessing some kind of divine intervention. Something that is beyond ourselves is having an influence on the things that happen in our life. And that's why during eclipses, things can change in our lives so rapidly. The gate is open and we don't know what is exactly going to come through. What is the divine intention? What's in store? We are usually in control of our lives and we regulate our schedules until the eclipse comes. And that's again twice a year when the sun is close to either node. And that's a time where we're not in control anymore. When something larger than ourselves takes over and decides to move things around to, remodel our house, so to speak. And that's why sudden changes can occur during eclipses. And it can be very positive changes. It can be getting that promotion, or I've seen people, decide to move to a new country, and from one day to the next during the eclipses. And it doesn't have to happen exactly on the day of the eclipse. It's around the time of the eclipse, so during that season, between the solar and the lunar eclipse, you know, you have a 2-week difference as between the solar and the lunar eclipse each season. So this whole time can be a major activator, accelerator, and change maker. Now, during eclipses, when the gates are open, it also means you can lose certain things. Things can be taken away from you, just as new things can be given to you. So this, as far as sun and moon goes, your whole personality, self, is going through this realignment with this higher purpose. Now, if the eclipse is particularly strategic to your chart, you know, if you have a planet on the degree of the eclipse, or where the nodes are, you're going to feel it more powerfully. Sometimes, you know, people go through eclipses and there's nothing that happens. That can be the case. So it's not every time, you know, twice a year, a major life-changing occurrence and you completely redefining your life. However, you can track that quite often there's a lot of intensity because it's almost like the energy is moving very fast during eclipses. Decisions are made faster and change can occur much more quickly than usual times. So quite often when we have these radical shifts, they usually occur during eclipses. And so looking forward, in like we talked about the next month's eclipse, July 2nd, we're in 2019, in case you listen to this video sometime, you know, in the distant future, go back in time. So this is July 2nd, 2019, and we see that the moon and the sun conjunct each other at 10 degrees Cancer, and the nodes are 17. So they are about 7 degrees away from the actual nodes. And this is why it's going to be a partial solar eclipse. It's not going to be a total eclipse, because the further away the new moon is, the less the moon is going to completely cover the sun. And so it's not going to create that full shadow effect. So the closer the conjunction is going to be to the nodes, the more total the eclipse will be. So how many degrees do you count to have the planet, whether it's the sun, the moon, or another planet? You know, Mars is very close and we're going to talk about it. You know, how far an orb can you use? I use 12 degrees when I speak about conjunctions to either nodes. So the solar eclipse, new moon, is happening on July 2nd. And we see that Mars is close by, and we see on the south node that Saturn is going to be exact on the south node. So Saturn is actually very activated as well, because it's on the nodes of the moon as well. So Saturn is also a gatekeeper. Now, the interesting thing when you look at the nodes, you always have to look at the rulers. So the south node in Capricorn is ruled by what? By Saturn. And so the ruler is actually on its own node. And guess what? What's the ruler of the north node? The moon. So the moon is going to be on the north node, the ruler of the north node, and Saturn is going to be on the south node, the ruler of the south node. Well, now that's incredible. Very potent. And I must say, you know, it happens every month, because the moon moves very quickly, and every month the moon's going to be in Cancer on its own node. So during our current time, it happens every month, but Saturn is on its own south node in Capricorn. I don't know how often that happens, but every, it's a matter of centuries, because for Saturn to be in its own sign when the nodes are there doesn't happen frequently. It did happen the last time Saturn was in Capricorn in 1990. It happened the same way that Saturn was on the north node. This time it's on the south node. So this was also a very unique occurrence, and that was about 30 years ago. But before that, in 1960, it didn't happen, and it's not so common. So pay attention to this eclipse, because it's an eclipse, and it's also the rulers on their own nodes. It's a double whammy. So what does that mean? What do I conclude from that? Just think about the fact that whatever planet is close to the node is a planet that will dominate the game, that will set its own tone. It's the planet that will be highlighted. So Saturn is going to govern the times we're in. And what is Saturn? It has to do with accountability, has to do with karma, it has to do with realignment, it has to do with becoming masterful. I talked about a diploma course. Well, Saturn is about, taking your studies seriously, whether it's astrology or carpentry or whatever. It's about becoming an authority in your field, in the field of expertise. But it's also about accountability. We see what's going on politically. We see governments being, leaders being held accountable or not. For example, just yesterday, as this is going on, Theresa May, the Prime Minister of United Kingdom, resigned because she basically is not able to manage this whole Brexit transition. And so Saturn is testing her and telling her, lady, you're not up for it. You're not masterful. You're not capable to lead this country effectively. And all of us, whatever capacity we are functioning, we are being tested. And if you are not honest, if you are not effective, Saturn on the nodes is kind of a judgment day. It's a big deal, and it's been there for a few months, since pretty much February, and it's going to be in proximity to the nodes. I'm going to double check this on the ephemeris. It's going to be in proximity to the node until November 2019. So, it came closer, as I was saying, around March this year. And you see that in July, it's going to be super close, exact on the same degree. So the activation is maximal. So we're going to touch on the different meanings of the planets to the nodes. Now, if we go back to our eclipses, sun and moon, you know, not just without Saturn and without the other ones, just sun and moon, people born with a sun on the nodes are people whose sun is amplified. And this is why there's a saying in astrology that during eclipses, when the sun is there, kings are born or die. So the portal, it is a solar portal. And what is the sun? The sun is our mission in life. It's how we manifest our destiny. It's leadership. It's the king and the queen. So there's something very regal, very leonine, very prestigious about the sun being on the nodes. And people who are born with this signature tend to come with a very special sense of destiny, just like a king or a queen, um, or you know, someone with strong ambition, with a strong will, with you know, strong creative capacity. It can also signify, you know, coming from fame in previous lives and being able to have tremendous presence. These are people that can, you know, really make a mark around them. And it can be on a small scale. It can be that they are very important in their family, or it can be that they, you know, that this applies on a larger scale. And you will see sometimes people who have the sun on their nodes, and you know, there's nothing too significant about it. It's not so common, but it does happen. And sometimes it can also mean that they are going to have a child who is going to be very important and have a special destiny, because the sun has to do with children. And so there can be some kind of divine intervention regarding children in their lives. Either a special child, a gifted child, or a child that really serves as a very important lesson for them. And in some cases, it can also mean that there has been a very important mother figure in their lives. And I'm going to touch on why is that. But the sun on the nodes, you know, bring prestige. So if you see someone who is not leading, you know, anything really prestigious and not doing much with their lives, and they're not very creative, or they're just, you know, very, very low key about it, you can encourage them. Tell them they were, you know, they come from a past life where they were Leonardo da Vinci, and they should do something with their potential. They may not be confident enough to go there. There are obviously reasons. You have to look at the rest of the chart to see why this may be held back and not coming into fruition. Now, sometimes because, you know, the nodes are the gatekeepers, excuse me, the nodes are the gate and the planet is the gatekeeper. When you have the sun on the nodes, it can also mean that this becomes overwhelming. You know, the energy can be so strong that you may feel like you do need to do something meaningful with your life, but there's so much pressure that you end up messing things up, and you can lose the grip. You know, nodes are very powerful energy. It's like a wild horse, beautiful, powerful. It's a dragon, actually. You know, the nodes are the tail of the dragon and the head of the dragon, or the way I illustrated it, let's review that opening slide, the snake and the eagle. The snake rising, from the belly of the earth, from the crevices, the depth, to ascend, to that very elevated place of balance. And, the snake and the eagle have a very important relationship in nature. They represent the underworld and the upper world. And they can prey on each other. The snake will eat eggs, and the eagle will naturally eat snakes. So there's an important interrelation between them. They're both predators, but they're both keepers of very different domains in nature. But we can also see the north and south node as the dragon tail at the head of the dragon. So when we speak of planets on the nodes, it can bring many gifts and many privileges and, fated circumstances, but it can also become an energy that is out of control, like a flood, or, opening the dam and having this tremendous current flowing through. So you need to be able to handle it. You need to be able to harness this strong energy, this strong horse, so to speak. So in other words, what I'm saying is that some people may not manifest this potential and not be as capable of activating this sense of destiny because they weren't able to harness this strong energy effectively. When the moon is on the node, so you have all these feminine energy, female leadership, great mother energy again. Mother Teresa, is a classic example of someone with the moon on her nodes, and she became the symbol of motherhood. So there can be a very strong nurturing quality, people who again have a very strong presence because the moon provides that sense of intimacy. So they can be great counselors, they can be people who have tremendous emotional depth or just, emotional capacity. So you can also analyze the relationship with the mother, with the moon on the nodes. There can be a very deep story. On some instances, it can be that the mother becomes this extremely important person in the individual's life, and she can be someone they really feel safe and comforted with, the ultimate mother figure. But in other cases, it could also mean that there has been some out of control, intense emotional dynamics with the mother. And one of the most extreme example I've experienced was with a lady that has an Aries moon on her south node, and her mother committed suicide in front of her. So that was obviously earth-shattering and something that was completely overwhelming. So we see the floodgates that I was talking about, something so big, so difficult in this case, and marking her and her destiny. regarding mother issues, because the moon immediately relates to the mother. Now, why is the sun on the node also relating to the mother? Because the sun is usually the father in the chart. But because these are lunar nodes, they have a lunar energy. And they also represent the mother in our chart. So look at the south node to understand particularly the mother relationship with you or with your client. So we spoke about the July 2nd eclipse, and it's going to be on the north node. Does it matter if it's on the north node or south node? As far as eclipses go, doesn't matter. Both are powerful. Just look at what sign it's in. Just look at what house it's in your chart, where the Cancer is going to be 10 to 17 degrees Cancer in your chart to see how that's activated. The next eclipse is going to be July 16, and this eclipse is a lunar eclipse. The reason is that the sun opposes the moon exactly. And they oppose each other on the nodes, and here it is within a 7 degrees distance as well on the other side. So the lunar eclipse, the solar eclipse is 7 degrees before the nodes, and the lunar eclipse is 7 degrees after the nodes in the opposition. So none of them are going to be total, because 7 degrees is too wide a range to completely cover each other's disk. And yet, interestingly, during this lunar eclipse, you are also going to have Venus on the north node, exactly opposing Saturn on the south node. So here, let's talk about Venus on the nodes. It's an opportunity. People with Venus on the nodes, mean that the energy of Venus is amplified, and that Venusian matters are going to dominate their evolutionary journey. What are Venusian themes? Anything that has to do with the material world, our body, our aesthetics, our artistic talents, as well as our finances, has a lot to do with money management, as well as our relationships. So people born with Venus on the nodes can, in some cases, be born into wealth, or they can have, all kinds of fated circumstances where there are dramatic developments on financial issues. They can make a lot of money, and they can lose a lot of money. So, that Venus is as a gatekeeper. So a lot has to do with what happens with that Venus, what sign and house she's in, and how this is managed. But it is definitely a potential to bring spirit into matter, into the material dimension. And if the person is working with this properly, there could be definitely a sense of material abundance. Venus on the nodes can also bring tremendous charisma. These are people who can be easily lovable, likable. People want a piece of them. And recently it's very interesting that we looked at the chart of Grumpy Cat. I don't know if you're familiar with Grumpy Cat. You can Google it. Grumpy Cat is this cat that was born with a very grumpy face, and the owners ended up marketing that. They didn't plan on it, but it kind of was an internet sensation, went viral, that face, and all kinds of memes and quotes associated with that face. And Grumpy Cat was born, you can check it out, on April 4th, 2012. And the reason why I'm mentioning it, because Grumpy Cat died earlier this week. And so Grumpy Cat was born with Venus on the South Node in Gemini. Now think about that. Venus on the South Node, and as grumpy as she looked, everybody loved Grumpy Cat. Everybody was having a hysterical time with Grumpy Cat. And so there was this tremendous popularity, and it was in Gemini, which has to do with the internet, with, you know, communication, and all kinds of, technology, using technology to advertise. And it's also Venus in Gemini has a lot to do with pop art, you know, with something that can be very light and funny. Now, Grumpy Cat brought a lot of money to their owners. So Venus on the nodes, she made them rich, and she didn't even know it, but she apparently had a good life, and she gave a good life to her owners. So that Venus can be very powerful on the nodes. Now, like I said, when I speak about popularity, some people with Venus on the nodes can also, you know, abuse that popularity. You can have people who are not always loyal, not always faithful. They like everybody, and, you know, there may also be a misuse of that popularity. These are people who can flirt with everything that moves. And in other cases, it can also mean that there's something very fated in relationships. There can be someone very important karmically. There's something maybe unfinished from past lives that they need to work on with relationships. So pay attention when we're going to have this symbol. You know, Venus is going to be on the North Node opposing Saturn. So if we, you know, how do we analyze this? You know, it's incredible to have so many planets on the nodes during. It's not just an eclipse, it's the whole family. Look how populated the North Node and the South Nodes are. So Venus is going to have to do with either finances and relationships, and then Saturn on the South Node is going to have to do with accountability and with the necessity to realign and to take responsibility and to master, you know, this domain. So there may be financial crisis because Saturn is going to force people to realign, to spend their money properly, to avoid waste. But most importantly, I bet you that there are going to have some scandals during this week where Venus is on the North Node, financial scandals or bankruptcies, because, you know, things that weren't properly handled or weren't honest, you know, Saturn brings back that honesty, the need for accountability. So anything that's dishonest, anything that's fraudulent can be exposed during this time. So it's going to be interesting. And the same thing with relationships. You know, if you've been cheating on your partner or the other way around, Saturn on Venus can bang, accountable. Suddenly, you know, the person is caught with their pants down, and it's bringing that accountability. You know, you can't just play around. There's a higher guidance here. There's a higher intervention, and, you know, the most unlikely circumstances can expose these dealings and whatever's happening. So since all of us astrologers are very honest and good people, we're not at risk of any of that. but then pay attention. And then let's look at the next chart, and that's coming up earlier on in June 14th this year. Mars is going to be on the nodal axis, opposing Saturn exactly, 1818. But beyond that, Mars is also going to make an exact trine angle to Neptune at 18 Pisces, to the Moon at 18 Scorpio. So watch out for this time. I mean, middle of June, fasten your seatbelts. We have so many planets at 18 degrees. Mars, nodes, 17, 18. Moon is going to be there for just a few hours, but it's going to be important on that day. Jupiter is 18 Sag, Saturn 18 Capricorn, Neptune 18 Pisces. And then you have Chiron 5 Aries, Uranus 5 Taurus, Venus 6 Gemini, repeating degrees. Always very important. But what we want to focus on in this session is understand what Mars and Mercury do on the North Node, opposing the mighty Saturn-Pluto. So Mars on the nodes mean that Mars is amplified. What does that mean? Mars is a gatekeeper. And who is Mars? Ruptures, anger, aggression, confrontation, separation, change, action, battles. So all these things are going to become intensified. So this can be a time where we radically feel like, you know, we're not going to be screwed again, and nobody's going to underpay us, and we are going to take charge, Mars, and fight back. So it can be a time where you decide to quit your job, to leave, you know, whatever it was, because it's in Cancer. It has to do with your family or your comfort zone or things that you're familiar with. So it can be a time where you're going to decide to relocate, or you can decide to, like I said, maybe move away from your home and not just relocate, but just leave your parents' home, so to speak, or leave your job. And I'm talking about the job because Saturn opposition to Mars, there can be a huge confrontation with authority figures. Saturn is, you know, the authority, is the government, it's the parent, it's the teacher, it's the boss, and Mars opposing it, you're not having any of that. So it can be a time of Mars protest, your own personal protest or global protests. Needless to say, it's going to be a very volatile time. And there can be a lot of tension between people who hold positions of authority and other people. So if you are the boss, if you are the president of OPA or any other organization, you're the Saturn. And so people can suddenly project a lot of dissatisfaction or confront you. And the other way around, you know, you can also be the one who is not happy about the way things are handled. So that's on a personal level changes. But on a global level, Pluto, Saturn on the nodes are already bringing a lot of political instability, accountability, corruption. You know, Pluto is exposing the corruption, and it's there on the nodes forever. Saturn brings, you know, the law and the need to basically regulate and expose fraudulent corruption. And then Mars opposing it. So this can be a time of political drama. And if we speak about the UK, you know, think about elections and how they're going to be at each other's throat. This is all happening on June 14th, and it's Donald Trump's birthday. So not only is he going to have this on his birthday, but it's going to be, whatever configuration is on the birthday is what you will carry for the rest of the year. So Trump is going to have this intense configuration as what we call his solar return chart, which will flavor his whole year. And we have to pay the consequences of his actions. So at worst, it could be a time where there's violence and there could be political conflict, armed conflict. Mars in Cancer wants to protect the family, which also means wanting to protect the country, your motherland. Saturn, political always. Mercury, can bring a mental dimension to all this. It can bring issues related to communication, the media, networking, things that you'll say that can be very confrontational. There's going to be verbal confrontation because Mercury is involved, or dealings. We talk about the tariff wars with China and the United States. Well, Mercury is the merchant, it has to do with commerce and trade. So you see battles in Mars with Mercury. So pay attention to that particular time. And because we have all these other angles and trines and triangles, we see how this is not just a Mars-Saturn interplay. Everybody's involved. It's going to affect, the resources of nature. Neptune has to do with nature, and the moon, is going to touch us very personally. It's in Scorpio. It has to do with nurturing and grieving. So, what is on your schedule for June 14th? Pay attention. Now, I want to bring an interesting study here regarding planets to the nodes. These four superstars, Kate Bush, Prince, Michael Jackson, and Madonna, are, at least three of them are very well known in the United States. Kate Bush, is British, but she's also an extremely talented, and they're all born on the summer of 1958. And they are probably some of the most recognizable pop stars in the universe. And look at their chart. They're born in the summer of 1958 when the North Node was conjunct the planet Jupiter and Neptune. So all three of them is mega stars. Have Jupiter, the planet of expansion, the planet of growth, of abundance, of internationalism, and Neptune, which has to do with fame. It has to do with what's beyond the boundaries. It has to do with the ability to bring art and music, at beyond time. It brings that mythical status. So when you have Jupiter and Neptune together, think of these two planets. These are planets that blow all the boundaries. They are boundless. They are infinite. They are super abundant. And they happen to be on their North Node. So is it a coincidence that three of the most recognizable pop stars are born within weeks of each other? I have this article on my website. You can check it out. I wrote a full piece on it. Just go to mauricefernandez.com, click on articles, and you'll see this one and a few others that you may find interesting. Now, Jupiter on the nodes, bring that abundance and bring that spirit, people with a strong spirit. And it's spiritual, but it's also spirited. But then we said anything that's on the node can also be over the top. It can be something that gets out of control. And so this is another example of someone born with Jupiter on the nodes. Elephant Man. So this is a person, there's a movie made about his life story, movie by David Lynch, The Elephant Man, and he's basically suffered from a condition that caused his cells to reproduce in out of control. So he grew all of these tumors and became completely deformed and grotesque, big. And so you see a Jupiter on the nodes here that went south. And I don't mean just south node. It went overboard. It was excessive. And it created something that's really damaging. So not every, like we said, planets on the node are a wild card. They're very powerful and they can bring, these tremendous gifts, but they can also open the floodgates and have you become overwhelmed. Now, other people born with Jupiter on the nodes can also be people who have very strong beliefs, spiritual leaders and teachers. But they can also be people who can come on too strong because in a very Jupiterian way, you think you're right all the time. And you may proselytize, feel that you can convince and convert everybody. So you can have bullies with Jupiter on the nodes. And one of them was Joseph Stalin, born with Jupiter on the north node, a sense of invincible vision, nothing could stop him. He did everything to manifest his vision at the cost of many people dying. So Jupiter on the node is quite the bulldozer. And so, you have Jupiter and Saturn, we talked about it. Then Uranus on the nodes. Uranus is going to amplify the Uranian qualities. It's interesting to see many astrologers who have Uranus on either nodes. Why is that? Because Uranus brings higher knowledge and it brings the need to upgrade everything. So people with Uranus on the nodes are kind of the problem solvers. They can be very scientifically oriented, or they can be simply people who have perspective and come into this life with, an ability to see details in the big picture, big picture, and be able to really have a clear understanding of what's going on. So they can be the forward thinkers and people who develop communities and bring solutions to this world. Neptune, as we said, people, who may come from, a place of deep spiritual involvement, but Neptune is also has to do with something very all-encompassing. So something that unites everybody, that takes us beyond the details of our lives to the big picture perspective. And this is why many people with Neptune on the nodes can be people who hold public service, people who sacrifice their personal life for a collective cause. So, there can be something, again, that is beyond our control, but it has to be service oriented. It has to be compassionate. And so these are people who may come from past lives where they were holding some kind of public office, whether they were entertainers, whether they were politicians or leaders in the field. You know, there's something about Neptune that has to do with serving the larger whole at the expense of your own personal life. But you can also have people who are extremely talented artists, visionaries. Neptune on the node, strong spiritual orientation. One of the dangers of Neptune on the node is being too naive. People who only, you know, see the good in everything and end up um, being taken advantage of. And last but not least, Pluto on the node. Oops, what's going on? Pluto on the nodes is with us for the past few weeks, few months. The nodes were on Pluto early April, it was exact. And so this means that along with Saturn, Pluto is extremely important during our this year. As you know, both Pluto and the node move rather slowly, so they stay there and linger until probably October, November again. Now, we're all aware that Saturn and Pluto are together, and they're going to be exactly conjunct next January 2020. And this will probably mark, a change in the world. You can, again, look at a video I made on my website, on my YouTube channel. It's called 2019-2020, about this conjunction. But briefly, when we look at Pluto on the nodes, it has to do with people born with that are coming with sometimes deep memory of destruction. Having been part of complete change, very radical changes, where they may have been part of revolution, or they may have been part of a war where there was a lot of destruction. So they come into this life feeling very suspicious, and a lot of, deep unconscious grief. But at the same time, these are people who are extremely resourceful, because they rise from any crisis and they can transform a crisis into an opportunity. So they've been through the tunnels and they've seen, the difficulties. They may have lost, battles, and they may have lost important people in their lives. Some of them may have been emotional losses, may have been physical losses. And they come into this life with an incredible survival instinct and ability to navigate the difficulties. As opposed to Neptune, who I said Neptune can be naive, Pluto is not naive, and people with Pluto on the nodes are quite sharp, and they will see the problems and dishonesty at a distance. But like I said, there's almost a feeling that they are scarred. They come into this life already knowing that we can't take anything for granted. So whether it's on the south node or the north node, it's the same. But because we live now in a time with Pluto on the nodes, this affects the collective. And we see how we keep talking about the destruction of the planet and the destruction of government, and every government falling apart. Nothing is holding, because Pluto is dismantling, and it's in the sign of Capricorn, which has to do with structures, with what is basically the guiding posts and the beacon. So the things that are normally a reference are suddenly getting lost, and we see basically a lot of deconstruction. Like I say, governments collapsing and the earth on the verge of destruction, and we speak about a sixth extinction. All of this, bring that sense of doom and gloom, and it's a very, in a way, typical to Pluto being on the nose. The last time Pluto was on the North Node, as far as I remember, was 1994 in Scorpio. And that was a time where there was the Rwanda genocide in Africa. So people, a destruction and devastation that to this day, is scarring. But it was also the year that South Africa gained independence from and change the regime from apartheid to Nelson Mandela becoming president of South Africa. So it was a time of resurrection after having been through this very dark period of racism and apartheid. You had the first black president. So that's very Pluto on his nose. um, 1969 was another period of Pluto on the nodes, Uranus on the nodes, Jupiter on the nodes, and we know it was a very important year where we went to the moon for the first time, Uranus on the nodes, breakthrough, space, Jupiter, expansion, and Woodstock, 1969. But it was also a year, where there were a lot of political difficulties. It was around the time of the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy the year prior. So there was a lot of political unrest and civil rights movement, being in the thick of it still. So this is the times we're in, and that's why I wanted to speak about this topic, is to speak about how we can apply this to our natal chart, but also to the current times, since so much is happening. And so I would like to thank you very much and encourage you to check this teaching program if you want to get to the depth of the soul journey, and if you want to really learn the magic of astrology, become yourself a messenger of the stars in the most responsible and profound way. This is an amazing program. So check it out, and thank you very much, everyone in your paradigm.